So junipers, I've got a lot to talk about in 45 minutes. So let's hopefully we can get all the important things in. Who here has a juniper bonsai? Who here struggles with juniper bonsai? What particular problems do you have with juniper bonsai? It's okay. This is a safe space. There's no judgment. Branches dying back? Sunburn? Wind? That's surprising.
Branches too long.
Branches being too long? Okay, that's a problem. Juvenile foliage, right. Well, juvenile foliage is branches being too long. Branches dying off. Well, I don't know why, and I've never, you're doing something special. Why do we use junipers as, for bonsai? Deadwood. Compact growth, tight foliage. They're very robust and strong species normally, but don't suffer from windburn. Sorry, I'm picking on you here. And they are very suitable. They're very suited for bonsai cultivation. Okay, they don't mind being in pots. They are relatively easy to manipulate, and with correct management of the foliage, they can be styled into a variety of shapes. Their natural habitat is some of the harshest environments in nature. They live high up in the mountains. They live in deserts. They live on the coast, going off of mountainsides, which is why we see them in these somewhat fantastic shapes. Now, the majority of the trees that we tend to have in this country as bonsai will be man-made specimens, such as these that were purchased at the auction the other day. Okay, where juniper bonsai really come into their own, where you see the Japanese masterpieces and European masterpieces now, are the trees that were collected from the mountains originally. Okay, so the Yamadori's trees, and this is one such tree. Okay, this is a Sabina juniper collected from Spain, and if we just ignore the foliage at the moment and focus on the dead wood, which was mentioned earlier, all of this wood at the front here is dead. Okay, the incredible kind of movement that we see in this branch. Okay, that kind of movement that kind of character cannot be replicated by man as much as we try. Okay, so all of the kind of like the man-made images that we see as sort of particularly as the Chobham bonsai or the commercially made bonsai are sort of pale imitations to those. Right, and so they hold a very special place in Japanese bonsai, and therefore that influence has then spread across the world. Okay, because of that incredible natural character that we have, that combination of the live wood and the dead wood, that speaks of an incredible struggle that tree has endured in nature. Okay, the twisting live veins and dead wood intermingling has a deeper sort of spiritual connection, sort of a deeper meaning perhaps than just a nice kind of like parkland image. Okay, there are ideas of, we see these sort of twisting trunks and the foliage pads, the cloud-like foliage pads, like a dragon sort of twisting up through the clouds. These kind of like images are kind of fundamental to juniper bonsai, particularly in the Japanese aesthetic. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why they are kind of used as a species in bonsai. Okay. Now, when I studied in Japan, if you didn't know, I did a full kind of apprenticeship out there, and that was where I was introduced to juniper bonsai. And I looked at them and I could see that they were incredible, magnificent specimens, and all of that kind of natural movement and that character was awe-inspiring. But for some reason, it didn't speak to me in the same way that a lot of the deciduous images did. Okay. And it took some time. It took until I actually sort of came back to the UK and sort of started making bonsai here that I actually realised why. It's like, because those images that we see as Japanese bonsai with junipers mean nothing to somebody who grows up in this country, where we don't have that high mountain landscape, where we don't have that severe environment where these trees struggle and survive in. Okay, when you go to America and you see these trees, see the junipers growing in their natural environments, high in Yosemite, or in the Sierras, or if you go to Spain and you see them growing in the Spanish mountains, and you see their natural environment and the struggle that they go through, it gives you a deeper kind of understanding of that. But for somebody who grew up in Yorkshire, we don't see that. Spreading oak trees, the winter deciduous landscape, that was what I grew up looking at, and that's what means more to me kind of in a bonsai aesthetic and way than perhaps some of these. Okay, however, juniper bonsai are a phenomenal species for working with bonsai, and you can get some very good results in a relatively short period of time if you understand how to work with them. Okay, any questions so far? No, good, right. So two of the problems that were mentioned, juvenile foliage and long-leggy branches. Okay. Why do we get juvenile foliage on? Because these things are quite interrelated. Okay, because everything that we do with junipers, everything that we do is about the foliage management. Okay. For a juniper, the most important thing is its foliage. Okay, you could take a tree with a juniper with virtually no roots. Okay, as long as it had good, healthy foliage, and you could pot it up in a system such as Mark's, okay, and keep it in a nice humid atmosphere, okay, and it will grow roots. Okay, but it's very, very, very difficult to take a juniper with very little foliage and lots of roots and get that to grow well. Okay. The foliage on a juniper is its engine. It's what drives it, what pushes it forward. Okay. And being able to kind of use that engine and understand how it works and how we can shift it around is a very important part of how to work with juniper bonsai. Okay. So, juvenile foliage. This is one of the biggest problems that we often suffer with junipers. Okay, these two trees that were purchased at the auctions have a little bit of juvenile foliage. Now, who here knows what juvenile foliage looks like? Who doesn't know what it looks like? Who could describe juvenile foliage? Spiky.
Spiky rather than kind of skulls.
Okay, how does it tend to grow? Pardon? Sort of shoots out. Grows in clumps. Okay, so we tend to see juvenile foliage growing. It's very sort of spiky foliage. Okay, it's very hard to see, but we tend to see spiky foliage growing in there, and we tend to see lots of little, maybe 3-4 spiky shoots come out from the crotches of branches. Okay. Why does it do that? Stress. Okay. What type of stress?
Over-pruning, very often.
Over-pruning.
If you pinch them, if you go over a whole plant all at once, it just wants to do the opposite and produce more foliage. Therefore, you get your juvenile foliage.
Okay, so it's a stress response to losing.
Yeah, it's losing its factory, basically.
To losing its engine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we tend to see this juvenile foliage forming like inside the tree, when the tree gets stressed. Okay, so why does it send out the juvenile foliage rather than the mature foliage, which is shorter, denser, more compact? Grows quicker. All right. It's also a very high risk and high return method of using the tree's energy. Okay, so imagine the tree has got a reserve of energy, right, and suddenly loses all of its growing tips. Right, so it has no way of generating any more energy because it's lost some of the important growing tips, because that's where all of the energy production happens, or the majority of it. Okay, so all the photosynthesis is happening in that lovely juvenile that lovely new growth tips. Okay, and it suddenly loses that. All right, suddenly stresses out. It's like, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to get any more energy? All right, it's got its energy in reserve. Right, it's going to spend that on a very high risk but high return type of foliage. Okay, so it sends out the juvenile foliage. Okay. Why is it high return?
Because when it works, it survives.
Very efficient.
It's very efficient. Pardon?
Big surface area.
Big surface area. So the spiky little needles have a larger surface area per unit of energy that it's invested. So if it invests 1 unit of energy, it can potentially get 2 back. Okay, because it's more efficient, it's got higher surface area. Okay, why is it more efficient? Because it's thinner. All right. Why is it high risk? Pardon? Yeah, it's more fragile. Okay, it's more easy to damage. Okay, it's easier to be attacked by insects, by physical damage. Okay, so when you get that juvenile foliage, you can oh look, I just pulled it off really easily there. Right, when you pull on it, it comes off really easily. But that mature foliage, you pull on it, and you can almost lift the whole thing up. All right, so there's a lot more structural integrity with the mature foliage, but that juvenile foliage doesn't have that. Okay, we see that on the procumbence types. So there are lots of different types of junipers that we work with in bonsai. So chinensis, the sabina, procumbence types, and then we have some garden type junipers. And essentially they're all, the concept, the basic fundamental concept is the same no matter what. Okay, just slight different variations on them. This is a sort of a procumbence type. Okay, and this has suffered very badly. Not on my hands, I would like to point out. This belonged to a customer who managed to almost entirely kill it. Okay, but we have a lot of dead branches on here. Okay, and the reason why these died is still yet unknown. But it's very easy to kill off the foliage on a procumbence on these types. Okay, these more sort of softer, spiky types of juniper. Okay, but as a result, okay, it's not investing as much energy into that foliage. It's not making it tough and strong and hard.
So does that immature foliage go into mature foliage
Yes, it will do.
over time if
Yeah.
you're not trimming it all the time?
Yeah, it will. We'll get onto that in a minute. It doesn't invest as much energy into it, okay? But what it will do is it will backbud more frequently. So with the procumbence types, it doesn't mind losing the foliage because it's going to send out lots and lots of backbuds on the inside, and it stays basically juvenile for its entire existence. Over time, some of them will turn mature, but it's very rare to see that. Okay, it's like the San Jose type junipers. It's very difficult to get one with full mature foliage on there because it all just keeps sort of dying back. Okay. So the importance of the growth tips cannot be overstated. okay? How we work with those, okay, in order to achieve our goals, right? And what are our goals with bonsai? To have a healthy tree, happy tree, and one in a desirable style, okay? And what do we want with our juniper bonsai? Compact, tight branches close to the trunk. Okay, that's what we want to try and achieve. And we want to try and achieve that with most of our trees. Okay, most of the stylings that we go for, we're looking for that compact, dense foliage pads. Okay, and so we have to understand how to achieve that without sending the tree into stress. Okay, so what happens if we do get lots and lots of juvenile growth on the tree? Okay, that was the question that was asked. Okay, so what tends to happen when we get juvenile foliage is we'll get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 shoots of the juvenile type of growth form at the base of a branch and start to grow out. Okay, what happens if we take all of those off? It just pushes out more juvenile, and then it does that again, and then again, and again, and it weakens the tree. The tree's just like, I'm trying to grow here, and you're taking everything off. Okay, what happens if we just let all 5 of them grow?
So we revert back. Some will revert back.
Some will grow back. What happens in terms of the sort of the style of it?
It's too bushy.
Gets too bushy, gets too clumpy.
Grows a knuckle.
Grows a knuckle. Right, so we've got to find a happy medium between there. Right, and this speaks to, right, this is a fundamental concept of bonsai. There's something that the tree wants to do, and there's something that you want to do. Right? We ought to meet in the middle. Okay? We have to meet somewhere in the middle. So you've got to let the tree do what it wants to do. Right? But equally, if you just do that, it grows off and becomes a bush. Right? If you just do exactly what you want to do straight away too quickly, the tree's going to suffer. So it's always about meeting in the middle. Right? So if we get 4 shoots, 4 little juvenile shoots that form, okay, because we pruned it too much, what do we do? Choose the best 2, the strongest 2, the best positioned 2, and let them grow out. If there's 5 or 6, we choose 3. All right? So we're never taking that step. We're never pushing the tree back too far. Right? We're just giving it a little punch in the stomach. Yeah, you little bastard. Right? We're not going in with a full-on haymaker and knocking it all the way back. Because what's going to happen? Bad things. All right? So we would then choose the 2 or 3 best positioned branches to start to grow out. And they're going to start to grow out, start to grow out, start to grow out. And they might start to turn mature. And then you say, oh, well, the tree is starting to, it's happy now. It's calmed down. It's got over its stress. It's calming down now. The tree is in a stage where it's willing to put out mature foliage. It's not in a stressful situation. Right? And then when we got those 3, then we can come in and we can take one of them out. Because what do we want with what we want as a fundamental structure of bonsai in our branches?
2, 4, 8.
Bifurcated branching. That's a fundamental idea that we want to try and achieve. Okay, and that's true for junipers too. If we do that, then we have this nice. We can have a nice even structure across the whole tree, which is very easy to maintain over a long period of time. All right, but that idea about never pushing the tree back too much at one time is very important. Okay, you said about, what did you say about over pruning?
You take away the factory.
No, but you said you go over the whole tree.
Oh yeah, if you go over the whole tree all at once.
Okay. Who here has heard this idea about never take away more than X% of a tree at one time? Yeah. Yeah, never take away more than 30% of a tree at one time, right? Yeah. I could take away 50% of a tree, of this tree, of that tree, and the tree would be very happy. Okay, I could take away 5% of that tree, and the tree could be put into a stress situation. All right? So you never think of it in terms of percentage. All right? If I took this foliage pad here and just trimmed across like this, right, what remains on the floor? 1% of the tree. I could go across there, just get short back and sides. All right? 3% of the tree is on the floor, but that tree is stressed. All right? So it's not a percentage, it's the type of foliage that you take off that's important. Equally, I could take off 50% of this tree, right, and the tree continue on as though nothing's happened. As long as on the remaining 50% of the tree, I don't touch the strong, powerful growing tips. Right? Because then the tree's like, all right, well, I've still got somewhere to grow, I'm going to keep growing in those. Okay? Right, so it's always about how much of the growing tips are left on the tree. That's the important thing. Okay? So how do we then manage it? Pushing it back, getting it into the right design. Okay, so I bought this tree. It's got some juvenile foliage on it. Right. I'm looking at this tree. It's going off and it's doing two different things. We've got one branch coming down here. We've got movement up in the top there. There's a couple of different options for making this tree. And when you see these junipers that have grown for shohin, all right, they're grown with more branches than they're needed. All right, they're grown with loads of branches in order to thicken the trunk, in order to give you some dead wood. Okay, this was a similar looking tree 10, 15 years ago, 2009. This was styled by my wife. Styling competition, a long, long time ago. She hasn't touched it since, but we'll put that past. All right? And sometimes you just have to go in and take loads of it off and expect the juvenile foliage to come through and then just work with it and let it mature out and grow through it. Okay. Other times, once we get to a stage of it being finished, that's when we don't want to be over pruning it. Okay. That's when we have to be very careful with like how much we take off all at once. Okay. But there's a good chance that at some point 50% of this tree is going to come off. So say, for example, I want to take off that bottom branch or that there. Okay. What do I do with the rest of the tree? Nothing. Okay, just make those two big cuts, leave it for a while, let it continue to grow, make sure that no serious reactions happened. Okay, then I can come in, all right, and then I can start thinking about how to prune back. Okay. Now, when we're looking at like pruning back, we can see that we have these big long extensions that are starting to come out. They're just starting to come out here. We have very little of that happening. There's one or two occurring here. Okay. Now, once we get to a stage of sort of quite, highly refined looking tree, as soon as those start to, and we're looking at maintaining a shape, as soon as those shoots start to come out, then all I'll be looking to do is to look at coming in and taking those ones out, going in with a pair of scissors and just cutting those tips out back to the silhouette of our finished foliage pad. Okay?
Cut into the green, or do you cut into the black?
Cutting through the stem of that shoot. So we're not going through and just cutting through like that. It doesn't matter if the stem is green or if it's brown. Okay? You're just cutting through the stem. Okay? And as long as behind, wherever you cut, behind that is active growing tips. And on this tree there's plenty of them. Behind it, the tree will continue to grow without being too stressed. Okay? On here, if we were going to do that, we just want to be making sure that we're not going off too hard, not cutting out too much of those. As long as behind, wherever you're cutting, you've got lots and lots of active growing tips, then the tree is not going to get too stressed out. Okay? The problem occurs of stress when we get to a situation like this. Okay? So this is a Sabina that has been grafted with Itoigawa juniper. So the body of this is a Sabina, exactly the same as this, right, with this awful, terrible foliage, which is very floppy and very difficult to maintain in an easy shape. We'll get onto that a little bit when we start talking about one of the trees over there. Okay. But this has been grafted with Itoigawa, and there's like 4 grafts on here? No, 3. 1, 2, 3 branches. Okay. That was done about 7 years ago. And for 7 years, it's basically just been allowed to grow out with a little bit of pruning happening just to kind of direct energy in certain areas and get rid of weak bits. Okay, now it's now about ready for its first wiring. Okay, and we get these big long shoots that come out like this. Okay, now this is very useful for styling. Okay, many people will have been tempted to cut those back, in order to get it to bifurcate, split off into two. But with junipers, having that big long shoot is actually really beneficial for styling. If you've got one big long shoot like this, you can make an entire tree. There are lots of junipers in Japan that exist just purely on one branch. One branch has been grown out, long shoot like that, bent into lots of different movement into it, okay, and then had the side branches grow off of them. Okay, so allowing those to grow out has been very, very beneficial for the styling. I could get this to an almost exhibitionable state with probably about 7 or 8 wires and a little bit of pruning. Okay. Bend the branches down and around like this. Okay. Put lots of movement to it, and then we cut the end. Then what happens when we cut the end?
Pushes out further back.
All of the side shoots around here, they will then start to grow. Okay, and this is the example of the kind of the apical dominance of the shoots, the auxin producing growth tips. Okay, so as the shoots grow out, once one shoot starts to dominate, okay, it starts to send back, it creates a hormone to restrict the growth of all of the stuff in sort of behind here. Okay, and just to keep growing out and out and out. So basically, it's generating energy and it's using all of that energy itself. It's stopping any of the shoots behind from using it. Okay, and that is one of the reasons this kind of growth habit. That's one of the reasons why the Itoigawa juniper is so desirable and so widely used in bonsai cultivation, because you can get these long shoots that extend out very, very quickly. Okay, but as soon as you start cutting them back, then the shoots behind them will grow out and clumps will form. Clouds will form very, very, very quickly. Okay, other junipers, the procumbents, and other ones will tend to form clumps a lot more. Okay, the other chinensis, Kishu variety, and blouse and things like that, they tend to form pom-pom like balls. and they don't shoot out as much. Okay, a bit more difficult to get that kind of big long extensions. And sort of understanding that and using that is one of the keys to kind of not only creating juniper bonsai, but also maintaining it over a long period of time. Okay. So that moves us on to one of the other issues that we have with juniper bonsai. Is there any questions about that so far?
On a grafted tree, how long do you need to wait until you can cut the old foliage?
Until you're confident that the scion, the stuff is growing well. So as long as whatever you've grafted into it has put on some decent extensions and it's growing well, then you can start to reduce it.
Do you reduce it in one go or do you do it step by step?
Step by step. Again, because you just want to make sure that there's enough foliage on the tree that the roots are going to be fed. Okay.
With the auxin reduction at the end, is that affected by if it's pointing upwards or downwards? So when you're styling and you've curled it in form of pad, does it matter if that tip is pointing out up?
Well, when you start, we'll then style it. Then you will cut the tip off. Right. Okay, and so that auxin producing tip has disappeared, and then everything else will then suddenly start to. Then the break has been taken off of those side shoots, and then they'll all start to try and grow out and become the new auxin producing shoot.
And that's when you go 2-4.
And that's when we can start to look at that, trying to build up the more bifurcated structure. Okay, that getting into that 2-4 bifurcated structure is important. But once you start moving down the size scale, making it smaller and smaller and smaller, and particularly with yours, you might need to start stepping away from that and just getting density is one of the key things there.
It's different to deciduous, where you would perhaps go right back to 2.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like with any of the conifers, if you go too quickly towards that bifurcated structure, 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, you can take too much foliage off all at once. The key is always like just having a feel for an understanding of like, does this tree have enough foliage on it in order to generate roots, in order to generate energy for the tree, and also to particularly in the case of junipers, to not stress it out too much. Okay, like with pines, you can cut them back quite hard as long as you're not cutting the roots back, but then you've always got that issue of is there enough foliage to feed the roots? Because again, a lot of people do think that the roots are feeding the tree. Okay, one of the key things that you have to begin to understand for successful bonsai cultivation is that the energy is transferred both directions. How do the roots grow? The roots grow because the foliage is feeding them. Okay, how does the foliage grow? The foliage grows because the root's feeding them. You can't have one without the other. Okay, and when that balance gets kicked out of balance, kicked out of sync, then bad things start to happen. So the coming back to the issue of sort of leggy branches. Okay, why do we get leggy branches? Are any of the branches on here leggy? No. Are any of the branches on here leggy? Are any of the branches on that one leggy? Starting to get that way. This one's starting to get that way. There's a few leggy branches on here. Okay? There's a few leggy branches on here. Right? And what do we mean by leggy branches? We mean branches that have long bare bits and just tufts of foliage on it at the end. Okay. And they are generally, not always, but generally undesirable for making compact looking trees. Why has that happened? Why has that happened? Not enough light, potentially, but equally, if you look inside here, in the dense area, the super dense areas, there will be backbuds forming in areas that you can't see, where there's like no light getting through to it. There'll be backbuds on there. I remember working on junipers in Japan where you completely dense. You would open it out, look inside, and there would be backbuds on the inside where there's no light.
You're managing the growing tips.
Managing the growing tips.
Pushing the auxin further back.
Okay, so it's basically, so there's been something has gone wrong with like how the growth tips have been managed, and also probably cleaning out the stuff on the inside. Okay, and one of the very like old school things, if you go back and look at the books from the 80s and 90s and speak to some of the people who were active in that time, what will they tell you about how to work with junipers? Pinch all the tips out and clean everything from the inside. Yeah? And what happens to all the junipers? They look poor. For want of a better word, they don't look very good. And they get bigger and longer and longer and longer and longer. Okay, how has this stayed like this? How has this tree stayed compact shape? Careful pruning. And not clean out the inside in the correct way. All right. Careful management of the branches, always making sure I've got something to cut back to. Okay. Constantly generating backbuds on the inside and allowing them to come out so I can cut back to them and grow them out again. Grow them out again. Why do we build a bifurcated structure? So we can step backwards as well as going forwards. Okay. One thing that a lot of beginners and a lot more experienced people are scared to do is they're scared to take out branches. Okay, and then replace them with other inner branches. Okay. The key thing is getting buds to form on the inside. Okay. And then allowing them to develop, and then cutting back to them, allowing them to come back out. All right? That's how we stop getting leggy branches. Now, if you look at these trees here, we have got juvenile shoots coming from in here. Okay, and we've got a big long leggy branch there. Okay, so how am I going to create a nice dense foliage pad in that area? Sorry. Am I going to clean those juvenile branches off there? No. Am I going to cut this long leggy one off? Yes. When is the time to do that? No. When the juvenile foliage starts to turn mature. So when I see these juvenile shoots starting to turn mature, and they're starting to the tree's starting to calm down, it's like, yep, they're growing near nicely, then I can come in and take that off. Okay, how can I encourage those shoots to grow a little bit more? I can prune the tip of this long leggy branch a little bit. Okay, start just gently nudging this one back, take a little bit of the foliage off of there. Okay, take off that auxin producing long shoots there. More energy is going to get redistributed to there. They're going to grow more, they're going to start to mature, and then in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, I can come back in and prune that off and then start redeveloping those. Okay. How do we get those back buds inside to form? All right, here's a long leggy branch, here's a long leggy tree. All right, how do we get back buds to form on the inside? Let it grow. What generates the back buds on the inside?
Forcing it back.
No. Energy production at the tip. Right? Energy production at the tips. Activity at the tips, right, having a surplus of energy, right, will generate back buds. Okay? When there's lots of activity going on, you'll get back buds forming. Okay? What stops those back buds from forming? All of the activity at the tip.
Backwards won't form if there's no energy at the tips.
Exactly. So you need the energy there to begin with. Okay? Once we then start to see those buds form, then we can start cutting back to them. You can't cut back to nothing. Okay? This is the same as taxation and spending. You cannot spend what you do not have. Right? You cannot spend what you do not have. You need to generate it first, then you tax it. Right? You just need to be taxing the right people, the right places, the right time. But you need to generate it first. Right?
How thick has the bark got to be before it can get back buds coming through? Because I mean, if it's you're not going to get back buds on really old stems.
No, you're not. But it depends. It depends how much energy there is going through it. Right. The analogy that I like to use with back buds is, right. You have got a hose pipe running from the roots to the tip. Okay, running from the root to the tip. Right. Where the branches are, that's like a join in your hose pipe. Okay. Right, you imagine you turn your hose pipe on a little bit. You've got a little bit of water trickling out the end. Right, a little bit of water. You put your thumb over the end of that hose pipe. What happens?
A load of water come out.
Nothing really. No, you can hold that without it going too much, right? You can hold over it without it coming off too much, right? You turn the pressure up a little bit more. You get a bit on the face, right? Where is that going to burst out? Pardon? Behind, at the join, wherever that join is, wherever that weak point is. But it's only going to do that if the pressure in the pipe is high enough. What is the pressure in that pipe? All the energy production that's going backwards and forwards. Right? You're only going to get that coming if there's activity here. Because we've got all that activity here, we've got back buds forming on the inside. Right? But because we've got all this activity here, those buds on the inside aren't going to start to grow out and develop properly. Right? What happens if we cut off too much too quickly? The tree's going to get stressed and get juvenile. Right, so we have to stage the cutback. We have to manage that cutback. We have to cut back just maybe the strongest area. Right, so we've got this branch here. We've got back buds on the inside that we want to cut back to. We're going to come in and we're going to take off maybe 30% of the really sort of strong growing tips at the air. Maybe take off a bit of that. All right, keep the bits keep those other bits there so the tree doesn't start to go in juvenile. The bits on the inside will continue to grow out, and as soon as we feel like we can cut back to that without the tree getting too stressed, we can cut back to it. But you've got to get that generated first. All right.
Do buds spontaneously burst anywhere?
Not anywhere. There will be places that it is much more likely to happen, and it's more likely to happen on younger branches, at the joints of younger branches. But say, for example, on a taxus, it can happen on the trunk. Prunus species, that can happen anywhere on the trunk. Maples, any node, and that can be on the trunk or anywhere. Right? Different species will bud in different areas, But really, the fundamental process is essentially the same. It's all about how much energy there is in the tree and if it's bursting to get out. And then if you suddenly put a stop to it, right, by cutting off some of those tips, right, then the energy will go in different places. Right? But the key with junipers is you should only start cutting back once you start to see those buds forming. The trigger for cutting back is that inner bud formation.
What do they look like?
Buds, like that.
Green or?
Look, like a little bud, a little bit of foliage growing out. Like a new shoot coming from the inside there. As soon as you start to see that coming through, and if it's nice and mature, then it's like, oh, wonderful, then we can start cutting back to it. If it's not, if it's an immature shoot, juvenile shoot, then you've got to let it grow out and start becoming juvenile. Right? But we're talking here about like fundamental basic principles of how to manage a tree. Okay, about the generation at the tips, getting the buds to form, cutting back. With other trees, slightly different, but right. But that's how we can maintain a tree, get those sort of dense foliage pads formed. Okay, so we just let it grow out a little bit. And when we start to see buds forming on the inside, then we can start to thin it out. Okay, and that thinning out of junipers is again, it's a key fundamental part of it. Okay, we can look at that with some actual examples in there. Right. What about feeding? Feed them. Just a general all-round fertilizer. Whatever you're like, you know, they don't need like tremendous amounts of feed, but they will respond well to it. Okay. Just a general, whatever your feeding regime normally is. Okay.
What's the difference in between mature tree and the one that you're growing in terms of feeding? Do you feed them all year round, or do you wait until spring has passed and you start to feed?
Well, I mean, again, this is something which is true across all species, right? With a mature tree, what you're trying to do with a mature tree, stop it from getting any bigger, right? So feeding a tree that you're trying to stop from getting any bigger is a bit stupid. Right, so you're not feeding it like, you don't want to be feeding it tons and tons and tons, but you want to be feeding it to keep it healthy. Right? If you've got something that you're looking at, you know, trying to get it to thicken up and grow, then obviously feed it more. Okay, but with that is going to come more work. You know, the more growth that you get, more things are going to happen. But essentially, like junipers are, you know, just there's no special trick to feeding them. Okay, just feed whatever you normally dip not feeding. Ideally, like, you know, very little but very frequently is always a good way of feeding. With liquid fertilizers is generally the kind of the best way to go about it. But solid fertilizers, you know, ideally organic is always best because there's very little chance of making terrible mistakes with it. Okay, but if you use chemical fertilizer and have good results with it, then that's fine. Okay, just be careful with pushing it too much.
You mentioned auxin.
Yep.
When you cut tips off,
Yep.
does that stimulate the buds?
It allows the buds that are behind to grow. It will allow them to grow more. Right, so if you look at, like this tree here, for example, there are buds on the inside, right, but they have not developed. They've not grown. You know, these side shoots, these side branches, they've not grown, right, because these have been allowed to go off too much, and then they've started to die back. Right, and so perhaps it's been left a little bit too long. Right, but having cut these back, what we will then and sort of styled, what we'll then start to see is, because they've been cut back, we'll start to see some new bud generation on the inside. Okay. But that understanding, that kind of allowing it to grow out will generate the buds, but allowing it to grow out too much will stop those buds from, will inhibit them.
The auxine coming down.
Yeah. So
How many years do you expect it to get to a pad? How many?
from this to a pad, a year.
Just 1 year.
I do. Well, I mean, you can make it look into a decent pad very, very quickly. How, like, once you start looking underneath, start looking at like the actual kind of refinement of it and the maturity of it, that's a different question. But like looking at it from just from a distance in a pad-like form, it's relatively easy to do. All right. Once you start going, all right, do you want it to look like a more mature pad and have it just starting to curve up at the ends and things like that, then that's something completely different, and that's going to take a lot longer. Okay, but to get this to a reasonably exhibitionable state, where it looks from a distance like, yeah, it's, you know, nice mature looking tree, it won't take very long. All right. Just if you just bend the wire and put it in the right places and cut it, and then allow those side shoots to grow out and do a little bit of extra pruning, and they will bunch up very, very quickly.
When's the ideal time for you to perhaps cut those tips back?
Okay, so when you're looking at pruning junipers, it can be done pretty much any time. Okay, but just the level of aggression, like how far you can cut them back, is the key thing. Okay, one of the things that I found that is very good is going into winter to leave them with ever so slightly kind of like just some of those elongated shoots ever so slightly poking out a little bit longer. Okay, not getting it into like perfect, you know, a perfect foliage pad, everything nice and tight, just having a few of those little bits just sort of sticking out. Okay. Think of that as being just kind of like keeping the engine just ticking over the winter. Okay, over the winter, sunlight levels drop down, the tree basically goes dormant. Okay, it's not doing very much, it goes dormant. Then what we wanted to do is in the spring for it to start growing as quickly as possible. Right, and what's going to start growing as quickly as possible? The strong shoots. Right, and so it's kind of like you're just keeping the engine ticking over the winter. And once we get into March, April, we start seeing some sun. It's like, wait, then it starts motoring away and going. Okay, and then we can start pruning it back. So basically, I will only be pruning the junipers between May to October. In terms of, but that last prune, it will always be just to leave them a little bit kind of shaggy looking, with those sort of shoots poking out. If it was going to an exhibition, they would all be pruned off and make it look nice and fine. That's not a problem. All right, but if it's just sitting on the bench at home, if it's just in development, whatever, just having some of those little shoots sticking out just gets it going in the spring that little bit quicker. The one thing that is different between us and Japan, Spain, everywhere else is the shortness of our growing season. Right? So really, it's only between May and September, October that they're actually kind of actively growing. So if you can get it going a lot quicker, okay, a lot sooner, then we can do a lot more in the growing season. Okay.
You put them in the greenhouse?
They can go in the greenhouse. They can go outside. They're very cold hardy. There's no real kind of.
Just warm them, that's all.
Depends if you heat your greenhouse or not. My greenhouse, my polytunnel is colder than outside because of where it is in the garden. But it keeps the rain off things and the wind. So, but what you can do is you can put them under grow. There are the people who have some of the best junipers in the country put them under grow lights over winter, and so that rather than the engine just ticking over the winter, it's in second gear. It's actually, they're still actively growing because they've got sunlight on them. This is the first one we'll look at. So it was once a show-hin tree and is now a very large show-hin tree. So how do we get it back to being something which realistically, I mean, the trunk thickness is the same as that. So how do we get from this to that? Stage one is to develop the back buds on the inside. How do we develop the back buds on the inside? Have healthy growth at the tips. You mentioned that you were having some issues with the tips dying back. Okay, right, this is a good opportunity to talk about pests, diseases and issues of junipers that we have in the UK. The most common thing that we see, which we tend to see over the winter and early part of the spring, is kind of like random tips just kind of like dying back here and there for no apparent reason. Just tiny little tufts dying back here and there. Who has had that happen to them? Right, the thing to do with that, when that occurs, the first port of call is to look for juniper scale. Okay, now juniper scale is a common issue, and what does it look like? Tiny little microscopic pinhead-sized white oval booger with a orange, yellowy kind of dot on it. Okay, and you will find them on the underside and the inner parts of the foliage somewhere on the branches. Right. So when you start, if you start to see that, or just generally, a good idea is to go through and just to check the underside of the foliage, looking at that, looking for any little white dots. Now, if you use tap water, you can get a white residue on your foliage and things like that. It looks different from that. There are some juniper varieties which can be very sappy, and you can get like a white sappy residue coming from the branches, but the juniper scale is noticeably different. What to treat it with? Fire. Sadly, that kills the trees. A minor infestation is usually you can sort of treat it with any kind of like off the shelf pesticide. If you have a significant infestation, so if it's on quite a lot of branches and you're seeing there's a relatively high density of them, the best thing to use is lime sulfur. We are very limited in what we can purchase as bug killer, pesticides off the shelf in this country for good reason. But the most effective pesticide that we have is lime sulfur, the nuclear option. It will kill everything, good and bad, including me. If you have a particularly bad infestation, during the winter, best thing to do is to give it a winter wash, 20, 30 to 1. 20 parts water, 30 parts water to 1 part lime sulfur, and then to spray. Make sure you spray on the underside. It will give a white residue to the tree, which eventually will disappear in the summer. If you have a particularly bad infestation during the summer months, dilute it further, so maybe 70 parts water to 1 part lime sulfur, or 100. Dilute it down and then spray it. Why the difference in dilution? It's just that you don't want to have that white residue on your foliage during the summer. But that is like the kind of the nuclear option, which should only be used with a serious infestation. Other than that, just your general pesticides should be sufficient. So bug clear, or there's one by Newdorf, which is called Bug Free, which is a very good one that I use. It's a contact killer. And you can use that to spray and get rid of them. The only other issue that we tend to see with junipers is spider mites, okay, which doesn't tend to be too much of a problem. I don't see it that often. Okay, but what are the signs of spider mite?
You shake the branch.
No, but what's the symptom? What do you see? If you see webs, then it's far too far gone then. You should be on it a bit earlier than that. What's the first thing? Kind of a greying, dullness of the foliage, particularly on the inside. Like if it's losing its colour. If it just starts to lose its colour on the inside, right, that's the sign to look for spider mites. Now, if you see webs, then it's a serious infestation. If you want to check for spider mites, then what do? You get a piece of paper underneath, shake the foliage like that, and then look for little insects running around, microscopic little things running around. Okay, but it's very rare that we see that. If you, when you're watering your trees, every so often, spray the foliage underneath. Just go up, turn your hose upside down, spray underneath, bit of moisture. During the summer, generally, is not a problem. The biggest killer of junipers, or the biggest damager of junipers, is you. Pests and diseases are it's very unusual to suffer from them. Okay, so it's not really the most important thing to think about with them. Right, so you suffered a little bit of scale, you treated it, you got rid of it, tree's come back, it's got healthy. Okay, so how do we get from that to this? Step one is to get the back buds to form on the inside. How do we get back buds forming on the inside? By having lots of activity on the outside. Okay, if you look closely at this tree, if we peer inside, we've got juvenile shoots and some mature new shoots all forming on the inside, close to the trunk. Could we ask for more? No. Hallelujah. All right, it's a miracle. It's the same things happening with these trees. All right, we've got lots of new shoots on the inside, close to the trunk. That is the future of the tree, okay? Those little shoots on the inside there. All of these long-legged branches, okay, in 5 years, not one single one of those should be on this tree. Within 3 years, ideally. Not one of the branches that are these long-leggy ones, these thin ones, should be on there. We should be rebuilding from new ones coming from the inside. Okay. So over the course of this year, well, immediately what we need to do is just to take out the obviously weak and unnecessary branches, the longest, leggiest, and those branches with the weaker tips. Get rid of anything that's not really actively generating lots of energy, but just taking up space. Get rid of those now. And that will give space, air, and sunlight for these new ones to start to grow. As they start to grow out, we can start removing a few more of those longer, leggier branches. Okay, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward. All right, just keep doing that. All right, the steps forward should always be being made by that stuff on the inside. If we don't take any of those off, then those ones on the inside will have no incentive to grow, and they're going to get shaded out. Okay, so in 3 or 4 years' time, we want to see that in an exhibition. Okay, the lower branches have got slightly less bud formation on the inside, which is what you would expect to see. Okay, there is some, but not as much. Okay, and so for those ones, then we'll just let those, we won't be doing any pruning of those tips or as much thinning out on there. Just let those grow out. Once we start to see a bit more happening on the inside, then we can do it. So maybe 6 months growth before we start. Okay? Any questions about that?
That's quite, because it's got to go through like a period of redevelopment.
Yep.
Would you put it in a bigger pot?
Nope.
That's efficient.
Why would you want to put it in a bigger pot?
Just to encourage growth, because it'd be a more...
The growth has already started to happen on the inside in this small pot. So it's doing absolutely fine. If there was no growth on the inside and it was a weak tree, this is not a weak tree, this is a very healthy, happy, vigorous growing tree. It's just growing in the wrong places. There's nothing wrong with the growth of this tree, except it's in the wrong spot. So it doesn't need to go into a bigger pot. Okay?
But if it was deciduous,
then possibly you might want to.
is it purely like you said earlier that the juniper, it's the foliage that's...
It's the foliage that's the key thing, yeah. Yeah. If it was deciduous, then maybe you would do that. But what you could be doing, right, is just swapping one problem for another. Right, so it's always just like, you just got to make a judgment call on what you think is the best situation, best thing to do. You put it into a bigger pot, right, okay, I want to then return it back to a smaller pot in the future. Got big, thick... It's one thing to consider for sure, But in this case, no. Okay? Right. Whose is this tree? What can you tell us about it?
I got it cheap.
You got it cheap?
Yeah, I've cut loads. It was ridiculously overgrown.
Okay.
I've cut tons off in the last 2 years, perhaps. And I'm at a bit of a loss as to where to go with it now.
Okay. In terms of style, or?
I haven't even decided on style or the angle I want to grow it at or anything really. Yeah,
Okay. Well, I mean, looking at the fundamental structure of the tree, trunk comes up there, gets into that point there, splits off into two, goes up there, and you've got pretty much half and half foliage on both sides. Okay. And so you need to decide, at the moment it's kind of like, it's doing two things. Going up and it's going across. You just need to nudge it in one direction, one way or the other. All right? And the most obvious one is to come up into there. Okay? Could you turn this into a Chobham-sized tree? No. Why not? Because the first branch comes up from, how much that? 18 centimetres? All right? So you can't reduce the size of this without trying to bend that lower trunk, which is just not worthwhile doing. All right? So reducing the height of it isn't really an option for you. All right, so you want to keep the height. All right, it's a nice line up into there. So just look at compacting it on that side. Maybe take off that bit there. Look at accentuating, maybe bulking up this branch on here a little bit more. Come across there, or you could take it up.
Every time I look at it, I come up with a different option.
Do they take radical bend as well?
Yeah, as long as you do it correctly at the right time of year, and then it can be very well. But I mean,
When is the right time to do that?
when it's actively growing.
And now?
Yes, for radical bends, yeah, but you don't need to do this. That's not a radical bend. Okay.
I've no idea what the variety is.
It's a type of Itoigawa, Chinensis Itoigawa. If it was me, looking at what the characteristics of this tree, the character of this tree has, the best one is this root in there and the movement of that branch in there. That's the best part of the tree. Right. And so finding a front, probably from there, where you can see both of those. It hasn't got any. It's not massively leggy. It's got some. There are some buds happening on the inside. So I would probably do something like that. Looking at it from there, elongate that branch across there. Bring the apex across a bit more. Compact it on that side. Do something like that. But the tree's healthy. It's happy. It's growing well. It's not got massive extensions on it. Okay, so maybe allow it to extend out a little bit more.
Yes, now I'll listen to what you've said about that.
Okay, so allow those extensions, and then what's the sign? What's the trigger for cutting back? Backbuds. When you start to see little backbuds forming on the inside, which for the most part is starting to happen. Okay, once that's going, maybe leave that a month or two. Give that a prune back, say the start of August.
Yeah, I've been pruning them back as I see them rather than waiting for the right time.
Let it go a little bit longer,
Yeah.
and then knock it back, but not too much longer. Okay.
I've never had a lot of success with them.
Seem to be doing all right with this one.
This is my current process.
Right, and then the other thing to do is just to clean out on the inside anything that's not actively growing as well. So there's stuff on the inside which has no kind of like active growing tip, just long, leggy bits of foliage. Okay, just clean out some of those bits. All right, from the inside, and what that will do is give space for new buds to form on the inside, send a message to the tree that it's lost a bit of foliage, send out more. Okay, as long as what you're taking off has no real kind of active growing tips, it'll be fine. Right, but it's a lovely little tree. I'd quite happily take that home. Right, could somebody bring one up from that, or do you want me to? I'll just go quick if I do. Right, bring up two. You bring that one up next.
This one?
Yeah. Right, we'll do this one first. Whose is this one? What can you tell us about it?
Purchased it 6 years ago. Initially styled it and done a great deal since to it.
Fair enough. It looks all right.
Yeah, probably a little bit thinner now. And,
Right, is it long and leggy?
no.
No. What's wrong with it? Neglect, that's it. just needs tidying up.
Lack of tidying and
Right. So how do we tidy it up? Right, anything that's dangling down, right? Anything that's not kind of actively growing, right? Little bit of juvenile growth. When it's just a little bit of juvenile growth, you can remove that if necessary, right? But really, what I would do, again, like you've not got any extensions that are really massively like poking out, right? So what I would do is I would clean everything out on the inside that isn't actively growing. So just go through. How do we know if it's actively growing? It's got those light green, like lime green tips. If it's got those lime green tips on the inside, you leave it. If it doesn't, right, and if it's tight, and particularly this type of Vita Ligara, right, which is a type of chinensis, just if it's really dense growth on the inside, you leave it. If it doesn't have that, you get rid of it. Right. Look for any branches that are like really weak on the inside. Okay, a little bit longer. See, that one's a bit longer. It's a bit hard to see, but a bit longer, and there's not that density to it. Get rid of those kind of stuff. And what are you doing by getting rid of that? Just creating a bit of space for the other good stuff to grow into. Right, if you just do that, right, and then let it grow for another month. All right, all the stuff on the inside now is going to have a little bit of space to grow into, a little bit of incentive to grow. Those ones at the ends will start to grow a little bit more. Come back in, cut those back. Just take the tips of that. Take those longest tips out, say by the end of this month. All right, you could have maybe not into a show by next year, but very close to it. All right. Fundamental structures, there's nothing wrong with it. Right. Maybe just tweak the branches around a little bit, but that's it. It's just cleaning. Right, and then just staying on top of it. Right. What's the key to bonsai? How do you make a bonsai? 2 words. One of them is little, and the other is often. Right, little and often, little and often. Right, you don't make bonsai, right, by waiting until it's a bush and then chopping it all the way back. Right, you do it walking around your garden with a pair of scissors, a cup of tea. A little bit here, a little bit there, right? 5 minutes on a tree.
So de-leafing you don't do?
Hmm?
You don't do de-leafing then?
Well, there are some jobs where you do, yeah. Right, but in general, right? How you get a tree to very little, but frequent, yeah. So you're not making, particularly with junipers, so you're not making like the refinement of junipers, right? Obviously slightly different with, first steins or whatever. So you're never making the massive changes in the foliage density. Just little bits here, little bits there, right? And once it starts to grow out, just a few little prunes here and there, boom, 5 minutes done. That's what it needs to be. The problem's mental. You look at it and you think, oh, I've got to go to the workshop and I've got to take my tools out and it's going to take me ages to do that. Or not remembering what you've got to do. And you stand there and you spend 5 minutes going, oh, what was it I have to do again? And then you start looking at it and thinking, oh, I should cut that branch off. Right? Best way to do it, come up with a really good plan, right out the gate, and then just keep on that path and just little and often. Right, whose is this tree? Yours again, right, what's happened here?
I think I just, after listening to tonight's talk, I think I pruned it about a year, 18 months ago, and it's struggled ever since.
Okay, right, so we've got some foliage which is yellowing and dull looking and has no active growing tips. Right. Get rid of it. Anything that's like that, just get rid of it. Anything that's actively growing, look, got those nice growth tips on it, leave it, don't touch it. All right.
Yeah, I noticed on that first lower branch, it's clump where it's started to back up.
Look, beautiful. So that whole branch is fine. All right.
Did you cut all those long scraggly branches off then and let that come through?
Yep. All right. You cannot nurse old sick branches back to health. Right? It's always better to get rid of the old in favour of the young. Just let that. I'm going to let that sink in. The young, efficient growth. All right. It's Logan's run. Get to a certain age. All right. Once we kind of like get to like a set state of maturity, right, with bonsai as well, there is a certain amount of this as well. Like we want to be looking at replacing some of the older lignified branches in favour of the young and more efficient and vigorous. Right, when you're looking at rebuilding a sick tree, right, you could have like one or two real like weak branches on it. You think, oh, that's so critical to the design of the tree. I've got to keep that branch. I've got to try and get. It's gone. Get rid of it. You've got youthful shoots somewhere. Right? You've got the growth here. Right? You can grow that out. In a year's time, you could maybe get some decent extension on that. In 2 years' time, you could have put a bit of wire onto that, started to make a foliage pad, you could have a completely different looking tree that's close to being finished in 4 years' time. Or you could sit and try and get these really weak old branches back to health. No. Right, just learn that there's some bits, as soon as they've gone past a point, like there's just no coming back. Right? And as long as there's some good foliage nearby, or like further back in on that branch, just get rid of the stuff that's dead and dying. Okay.
On what you said about replacing the old branches with the new, young, vigorous ones.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've always thought this, but I never asked anyone. You see these trees that have been around for like 60, 70 years. These famous trees.
Yeah.
So the chances are for them to still be that compact, that you're almost not looking at the same tree in terms of branches, because eventually branches have been replaced.
Primary branches, secondary branches, yes, but the tertiary branches are constantly being. So that's again, you kind of like you're growing it out, and then you're cutting it back to newer bits, and then basically then rebuilding the same kind of structure.
So you're always thinking, basically, how can this be replaced 6
Yes.
7 years down the line?
And how do you build a structure that can be easily replaced? Bifurcation, bifurcation, bifurcation.
Is that the same for deciduous then?
It's exactly the same.
Super ramified maple that gets to the point where you go, look, this is getting too leggy. Let's spend 3 years doing it again.
The trick to it is to not have to, when you're cutting back, is to never be cutting back too far. So you're never cutting back to primary branches and going far. But yeah, it's that basically, it's managing, again, that little and often, cutting back a little bit, and then growing out a little bit, and then cutting back a little bit. Making those steps quite small is the key to maintaining. Same for pines, same for junipers, same for everything. It's the same for maintaining a mature bonsai. Right? And again, all it is about thinning the branches out, cutting back, regrowing step out. As long as you can make those steps small, you should never really notice a massive difference on it. Right? But yeah, other than that, right, just grow that stuff healthily, okay, and then look at potentially restyling it, okay. But it could be a blessing in disguise. You know, and sometimes, like I said, with a lot of this kind of like Shohin type material, you basically have got to cut it back to just tiny little inner shoots, juvenile shoots, and then just live through like redeveloping it from those tiny little inner shoots. Right? But it's all about this year getting back to that healthy growth and just letting that extend out. And then once you've got that, once you've got not shoots as long as this, then you've got something to play with. Then you've got something to paint your picture with. Okay? If you look at those people who are the most successful at growing trees, that's, you know, making small interventions at the correct time, frequently. Okay? Will get you to your end result quicker. People say about having patience with bonsai. It's not about patience, it's about efficiency. Right? We want to get there as quickly as possible. But anyway, whose tree is this?
Well, it's one that I look after, but it's actually a club tree.
It's a club tree. It's one that you look after.
It was donated to the club.
Okay. Right. What can we say about this tree? Does it have any problems? Does it have any issues? Pardon?
Well, I don't know, it's got a little bit leggy. I'm looking at its branches.
It's not massively leggy. Top heavy. Looks a bit like a lollipop. Not from a styling perspective, but just from a health perspective. The lower branches are starting to weaken a little. Okay? And so that's something that needs to be addressed. Okay? So in order to make those branches healthier, all we really need to do is to trim out all of the dead and dying bits on there and allow as much extension on those as we possibly can before looking at pruning back. Okay, the top of the tree is starting to get a little bit dense, but not overly so. Okay, what are we trying to achieve with styling a tree is to get a nice density of foliage. That's kind of like where we want to be. The reason why it looks strange is because this is not as dense. It's because there's disparity between the two. Right, it's not that this is too dense. Right, it's that that's not dense enough. Okay. And this is one of the problems, like when you can look at sort of styling a tree and things like that, is that you have to look at the issue. You have to look at it and evaluate it and understand it's about the relative, in this case, the relative density between the two areas, which is the one that's out of key. It's this one down here. It's not that's too dense. All right, you can still see the structure. If you look at that, you can still see the structure in there. So you're at roughly where you want to be with the density of foliage pads. It's not nice. It's nice. It's mature. It's not. You know, it looks okay. All right, so it's not that this area that's the huge problem. It's the lower areas. Okay, so how do we get those to strengthen up? Okay, don't prune them. Just let them extend out. Have these areas been pruned back?
No.
Okay, good. Just keep that going. All right. Overall, what we could look at is maybe just a little bit of a reduction up in the top, not by much. But just look at some of the strongest areas, just take some of those bits out. Okay. Would we what?
If you prune the top at the same density as the bottom.
All right, so when you've got a relative, a problem between like the relative densities or the lengths of branches or whatever it is, okay? Again, what you want to try and do is meet in the middle. If you prune back the top to the same density as the bottom, what's going to happen? It could become too weak. Also, what could happen, particularly with like a deciduous tree? Not necessarily the top would die. I mean, you obviously can keep stuff on there. How is it going to respond? It's just going to send out like massive strong growth, right? And so you've got to just.
But you're talking about okay, so bottom part
Needs to catch up with the top.
So the issue in 2 years' time, the top of the tree will be too dense if you don't do.
So what you've got to do is just keep thinning it out a little bit here, a little bit there, but you don't want to go too far back. Right? You want to keep, basically, this wants to tread water for two years. One step forward, one step back. One step forward, one step back. Cool. Right? Not 3 steps back, and then. Right? So you want to be like keeping this at that sort of same density whilst this one catches up. Right? That would be the easiest way of doing it. Okay. The other issue that we have, the other thing that we need to look at with this tree is, I mean, there is a bit of kind of like weakness in this foliage here. Has it improved recently?
Not a huge amount, no.
Okay, there is a bit of kind of like dryness and dead foliage on this on some of these lower branches, but the tips are fine, and that's the key thing. Okay, the one thing that is noticeable about this tree is it has flowers on it. Okay, it has female flowers. Okay, so you see a lot of these little white dots here. Okay, lots of those little white dots there. They are the female flowers. The male flowers on a juniper are much more noticeable and are big kind of like pollen cones. The female flowers are slightly less noticeable. Okay, but the biggest issue that we have with that is that when those flowers drop off, okay, the stem, the leaf that was supporting that will die off. Okay, because it has lost its growth tip. The growth tip turned to a flower, dropped off. The little stem of the leaf that was supporting it will eventually die off. Okay, and so this sort of time of year and going forward, you may notice some yellowing foliage sort of dropping off from the inside. Okay, and that often happens with junipers. You get some yellowing foliage on the inside drop off. Okay, usually nothing too much to worry about. Okay, particularly if you have a tree which flowers heavily. Okay. Now, the majority of man-made cultivated trees from Japan have been selectively chosen, like these Itoigawa varieties, they've been selectively chosen to be asexual. Right? So they are neither male, they flower neither male nor female. Or if they do flower, it's very lightly. It's a genetic trait. Why is that a good thing? So it doesn't lose the foliage. Sabina junipers, which have been collected from the mountains of Spain and have been, people have tried to get them to turn into bonsai with varying success. Okay, flower very, very heavily. And so you get a lot of dieback of the foliage. Right, so the foliage grows out, loads and loads of flowers, and then you end up with lots of the foliage sort of dying back, long leggy stems with no foliage on the back, just the growth tips at the end, and then lots and lots of growth on the inside. Okay, so that's one thing to look out for. So with this tree, what we want to do is just to look at taking out anything that's really weak and dying anywhere on it. Okay, maybe reduce the density in the top just a little. Okay, just take out some of the strongest areas, but nothing too much. Okay, then from a style perspective, okay, I mean, is there any, when it was donated, is there a you know, are we looking at keeping a certain style because of the donation or anything like that?
No, I haven't done a huge amount with it in the sort of 4 or 5 years I've had it. It just gets better and watered. And the wired last about 5 years.
Well, it has a nice kind of elegant feel to it in terms of the trunk movement and the kind of the lack of lower branches. Okay. It would be perhaps nicer to see maybe a little bit. All I'm doing here really is cutting off very weak and branches that aren't doing anything. There's nothing significant coming off. It would be perhaps nicer to see a little bit more of that movement. Okay, and just try and get some of the foliage a little bit kind of closer in. Okay, so looking at the longest and leggiest branches. So for example, got this big one sticking out the back here. Okay. How can we compact that? How can we get that a bit close to the trunk? All right, that longest one there, is it all right to cut that off? Yeah. All right. All right, this longest one sticking out the back, which one was it? All right, let's get rid of that. And that. Okay, what does that do? Right, gives us some space to lower those branches down, put a bit of movement into them, right, and get them a little bit more compact. So that's about it really. Just looking at where can we cut back to in order to try and get a little bit more, everything a little bit closer to the tree. It's all just been kind of like going off in all directions rather than, and where I'm cutting back, there are inner buds on the inside to replace the growth. Now looking from the front, can you tell where I cut back? Not really. Okay. So why is that side the front? That root coming up into that movement of the trunk. That is the nicest character of the tree. Okay. That branch there. The line from that root coming up into that branch. That's your tree there. Being able to see that. Right, so anything that's not really helping that to flow can be brought back in a little. This branch up in the top here, for example. Big thick bit there. And then just close that up. Okay. Any questions about that? Is it in the wrong pot? From what aspect?
It's quite a feminine pot.
It's quite a feminine tree.
Female tree.
No, that one's feminine.
It's an elegant tree. It's an elegant tree, and the pot is a soft one. In terms of the shape, I would say it's more common to have conifers, junipers in unglazed pots, but it's not a necessity. Okay,
I haven't actually touched on wiring.
no,
Do you not wire them?
you have to wire them at some point.
Sorry?
You will have to wire them at some point. I did touch on wiring. I said I'd put 7 wires on that tree. Right. Yes, you do. You do need to. You will need to wire them. But ideally, doing it. The key thing is about building your correct branching structure. Pruning is always the most important thing in order to get a decent branching structure. Okay. So that you don't have to wire everything into place. There's very few wires on this tree. Okay. If any. All right. Because the primary branch structure was step. And then from that, build up the secondaries and tertiary branches through a lot of pruning.
Does the wire have to be on for sort of like yonks or a couple of months?
A couple of years.
Depending on thickness of the branch, yeah.
A couple of years is normal. That would be your kind of. It needs to be on there as long as it takes to hold it in position, and that would generally be a couple of years.
Can you wire at any time?
Pretty much. As long as you're not doing anything too dramatic. If you're doing anything dramatic and making big manipulations where the branch is likely to crack and to be damaged, then it needs to be done when the tree can then recover from it afterwards, so at some point during the growing season. But if it's just a little bit of manipulation here and there and nothing too serious, then yeah, any time is fine.
Assume with junipers, like any other, maybe like deciduous, you're still trying to create taper for your branch structure as well.
It depends on the size of the tree and stuff like that. Obviously, like with your little one here, yes, you do kind of want to build that, but really, like a shohin tree is a phenomenal trunk, one branch, blob of green on top. I mean, is essentially what a shohin is. Like, you're going to struggle to get like loads and loads of definition and fine points and stuff into a small. Generally, yes. Right. But particularly like when you kind of like working with Yamadori stuff, you can have like massive bits of inverse taper and things like that, and then you need to start moving away from the more kind of the conventions of bonsai, like yes, you have to tape and stuff like that. I would say for a tree like this, then yes, because it is an orthodox looking bonsai. And so you would be looking at those points in order to give it kind of character and to make it look well constructed. Right? Because that's what it is. It's a constructed tree. And so if it's doing that, it should be as well constructed as it possibly is. For something like this, like with its crazy wild, not so much this, but like with all of that sort of twists and turns and things like that, then it's realistically what you want to be doing is making sure the foliage pads are put in the right places in order to make the most out of that character and to frame it well and what have you. I mean, with this, obviously, we're looking at showing off that branch there, and these branches have been growing out in order to get thickness so that we've got some taper, and the the graft unions are as hidden or as not noticeable as possible. There is one hideous one around the back here, which is going to have to be hidden by some foliage. Like, you know, going to have to build a foliage pad around there specifically to hide that. And so there is a certain amount of kind of like jiggery pokery and not necessarily sticking to those conventions in certain situations, but I would say it's, you know, tree specific rather than juniper specific. For this one, like essentially this is a bonsai. Like, it looks like a bonsai. It's, you know, so that sort of construction, you know, looking at the relative thicknesses of the branches as you're going up and highlighting that as an actual kind of character feature is a key part of it. Like with other trees, it doesn't necessarily matter if there's a thicker branch up in the top. If you've got a thicker branch up in the top of like a shohin, hide it so that you can't see how thick it is at the top, things like that. So.
Sadly, Peter, we've run over the top. We're going to have to call a halt to it now, but
Okay.
I think we've all learned a huge amount tonight about how to look after our junipers. So,
Been a pleasure.
thank you so much.
It's all right. Thank you.